When Nolan Reed passed through Westfield just after noon that July afternoon, he wasn't thinking about the past. He was on his way to a contractor site, glancing through open yards and overgrown hedges, when a flash of red hair, three identical shades, stopped him. There, in a backyard behind a white picket fence, three young women leaned over a birthday cake. One turned. She saw him, and she flinched. It was only a second, but it was enough to break everything Nolan had spent 13 years forcing himself to forget. Because in 2010, those girls were buried, and they were his sisters. A sudden inland storm had cut across the water, sending campers to shelter and boats drifting toward the far banks. Lana and Richard Reed, both in their early 40s, both school teachers, had taken their three youngest children, triplet girls aged 6, for a final summer trip before the school year resumed. Their eldest son, Nolan, had come reluctantly. He was 14 then. They were renting a small A-frame cabin near the waterline. Lana had pre-packed meals in Ziplocs. The girls had pink life jackets that matched. They called them water armor. Nolan brought a cracked Nintendo DS and headphones he barely took off. On the day the storm hit, the timeline was murky. According to official statements, Lana and Richard had gone to help an older couple whose pontoon had slipped its mooring. It wasn't supposed to take more than 10 minutes. The girls were coloring on the screened-in porch. Nolan was up the hill at a park lodge with cell reception. When the Reeds returned, the porch door was swinging open in the wind. The coloring books were soaked, and the boat, the small green fiberglass boat they hadn't used all weekend, was missing. So were the girls. At first, no one panicked. Maybe they'd wandered. Maybe they were hiding. Lana remembered calling their names through the trees while Richard ran the shoreline, scanning the water. But by nightfall, the sheriff had been called. Search teams were mobilized. Helicopters came the next day. Dogs were brought in. A single child Sandal was found half submerged near the inlet's mouth. By day 3, the assumption turned. It wasn't a search anymore. It was recovery. And after 2 weeks, with no bodies, no sightings, no evidence of a crime, the Reed triplets were officially presumed drowned. The storm had scattered debris, currents were unpredictable, and small bodies, the sheriff noted somberly, don't always surface. 3 child-sized caskets were buried in a cemetery outside Coeur d'Alene. Closed. Empty. Nolan stood between them, hands in his blazer pockets, face blank. He remembered wishing it would rain again, so he wouldn't have to look at his mother's face. The years after were quieter. Grief didn't shout in the Reed household. It just pressed inward. Lana stopped teaching. She started gardening instead, even in the winter, even in places where flowers couldn't grow. Richard went back to work, but barely spoke. He sat with the TV on and didn't follow what was playing. Nolan grew up. Quietly. He didn't argue. Didn't flunk out. He got a degree in construction technology and moved 3 states away. He called home less each year. By the time he was 27, he rarely mentioned Idaho. Not the lake. Not the porch. Not the last morning the girls had waved at him from the dock while he looked away. He hadn't dreamed of them in a while. So when he drove through that neighborhood in Westfield in 2023, a job site off Martin Grove Avenue, a detour past a line of modest brick homes, he wasn't prepared for what his eyes would land on. A backyard. A chain of balloon arches. A folding table covered in paper plates. 3 women, slim, pale-skinned, each with that unmistakable burnt red hair. One of them glanced up, met his eyes, and something passed across her face like an echo from another life. Recognition. Fear. Memory. Then she turned away. Nolan didn't stop the car, didn't get out, didn't ask questions, but his fingers were already trembling, because what he'd just seen wasn't coincidence. It was a fracture, a piece of a puzzle he thought had been sealed with dirt in 2010. Nolan didn't go back that day. He told himself it had been a trick of the light or some impossible lookalikes. But the moment he pulled into the construction yard and cut the ignition, his hands refused to stop shaking. clipboard he normally carried sat untouched in the passenger seat for nearly an hour. By the time the sun began to drop behind the hills, he had circled the neighborhood 3 more times, slower each time. But the yard was empty now. The balloons were gone. The folding chairs folded. Curtains drawn. No sign of the red-haired girls. He drove back to the motel and stared at the ceiling until 3 a.m. The next morning, he returned before sunrise. It was a pale blue house. Narrow yard. Aluminum gutter hanging loose at one corner. There were toys in the grass. Nothing unusual. A pink soccer ball. A bent hula hoop. The garden beds had been recently weeded. Nolan noticed the hydrangeas were clipped into deliberate, measured shapes. Too neat. A new family, maybe. Someone who happened to have triplet daughters. But the odds of that were microscopic. And it wasn't just the hair, or the way the 3 girls had stood, almost shoulder to shoulder, almost protectively. It was the look in the one girl's face, the one who had locked eyes with him, because Nolan had seen that exact look once before. The day they were told the search was over, he drove straight through lunch and arrived at a public library 2 towns over, where no one knew his name. He didn't want to risk asking local staff about rental records or property logs. Not yet. There was something about the neatness of the house that made him cautious. It didn't feel like the kind of place you could knock on. He started with archived obituaries. The disappearance had made local news, then regional headlines. Triplets lost in lake storm. Photos of the girls in matching swimsuits. A quote from Lana. Softer one from Richard. He scrolled past them without reading. The funeral announcement was dated 2.5 weeks after the storm. Then came silence. There had been no follow-up pieces. No interviews a year later. No reopened investigations. It was as though the Reeds had simply folded back into quiet, rural life, and the rest of the world moved on. By the 3rd day, Nolan had talked himself out of going back again. But he did. Not to the house this time, but to the lot behind it, a sloping municipal greenbelt with patchy grass and a disused trail running behind the entire block. From there, you could see the backyard without being obvious. He waited, watched. For hours, there was nothing. Then, mid-afternoon, a screen door opened, and one of them stepped out. She was older now. Of course she was. She would be 19. But her gait, the way she kicked at a stick in the grass, the way her fingers toyed with the hem of her shirt, it was all familiar. Not in an abstract way, but in a way Nolan felt like muscle memory. Like watching a version of his own childhood reflected back. She knelt beside a planter box, plucked a few dead leaves, then looked up, straight toward the greenbelt. He ducked instinctively behind a low limb. He hadn't made a sound, but she stood abruptly and stared for a long beat. Then she turned and went inside. He didn't see her again that day. That night, he dug through the only box he still had from Idaho. Not the photos, those had stayed with his parents, but a few drawings and worksheets from the summer before the girls disappeared. Crayon self-portraits, scribbled lists of favorite foods, 3 pressed flowers taped to an index card and labeled in careful kid writing, "Mine, mine, mine." It wasn't proof, but it wasn't nothing. In the back of his motel mini fridge, he found a faded Polaroid he hadn't looked at in years. The triplets at the lake. They were sitting on the porch steps, half wrapped in towels. One of them, Maris, had her hand on his knee. He stared at it for a long time. Then he looked up directions to the county clerk's office. The woman at the front desk was polite. She handed him a property record request form and asked for the address. He gave it. She typed. "Ha." Nolan said nothing. "Looks like that house is owned by an estate out of state. No individual listed on the deed, just a shell trust in Montana. Any tenants?" She frowned. "Wouldn't be here. You'd need rental permits if they filed. But honestly, lots of owners don't bother unless it's city mandated. Can I get the purchase history?" She hesitated. "It's not restricted, but I'll need to redact names on this one." She printed the file. Nolan skimmed it fast. Purchased in 2011. just months after the funeral, by a trust named White Grove Holding LLC. That night, he called his mother. It had been a while. She picked up on the third ring, her voice soft, distracted. "Nolan? Yeah. Sorry. This isn't really a great time to talk. I just wanted to ask you something." A pause. "Is everything okay? I just need to know, did you and Dad ever hear from that guy again? The one who came to the lake that summer. With the boat." She went silent. "You remember who I'm talking about?" "I remember," she said carefully. "But I don't think he had anything to do with what happened. Do you remember his name?" Another pause. "We never got a last name. He said he was visiting his brother nearby. Had just moved out from Minnesota, I think." "Why?" "No reason. Just something someone said." "Did someone find something?" "No." He lied. "It's probably nothing." But it wasn't nothing. And he knew it now. Nolan didn't sleep well after the call. There was something in the way his mother's voice had shifted, a subtle tension, like she'd walked back into a room she hadn't opened in years. And she hadn't asked him why he brought it up again. That was the part that sat wrong. She always asked. This time, she didn't. The next morning, he drove 2 towns over and parked at the end of the same block. He left his car near a recycling depot and walked back to the neighborhood on foot. The sun was still low. Most houses were quiet. Lawn sprinklers hummed. He crossed behind the greenbelt again and stopped just before the break in the tree line. And waited. Around 7:40 a.m., a vehicle pulled up to the driveway of the pale blue house. Not the red van he half expected, but a dark-colored sedan. Late model Ford. Tinted windows. It idled for less than a minute. The door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, maybe mid-50s, pressed button down. No jacket, despite the heat. He carried a paper grocery bag in one arm and a narrow file folder in the other. The front door opened before he knocked. One of the girls, no, women, greeted him. She didn't look surprised, just stepped aside and let him in. The door shut behind them. Nolan took a slow breath. This wasn't a normal house call. At noon, the man emerged again, alone. This time, Nolan followed, kept 2 cars back. The Ford took a turn onto a feeder road, then pulled into a private medical office on the edge of town. No signage out front, just a nameplate, Riverside Developmental. No other cars in the lot. Nolan parked a few blocks away, walked past the building twice. It had that institutional quiet, blinds closed, front desk empty, no posted hours. When he tried the side door, it was locked. The parking lot security camera angled toward the road. He left. Back at the motel, he tried to pull the facility's business license. Nothing came up under that name. No tax ID. No state registry. The office existed, but not officially. He leaned back in the desk chair, staring at the cracked ceiling. What he was seeing, and what he wanted to believe, were 2 separate things. That was the part he couldn't square. These weren't girls being kept hidden in some underground bunker. They were attending birthday parties, clipping flowers, opening doors. Why wouldn't they leave? Unless they didn't know they could. Unless someone had told them for years that there was no one left to return to. That night, Nolan walked past the house one more time. The porch light was on. A woman, not one of the triplets, stood at the kitchen sink, visible through a thin curtain. Short dark hair. Slender build. Early 60s, maybe. She wore gloves and moved with practiced quiet. He watched her rinse what looked like glass jars. She turned them upside down on a towel, hands precise. Methodical. She never looked up. The next day, he drove into the city and met with a private investigator. Not a big firm, just a woman named Margo who worked out of a second-floor walk-up with a ceiling fan and a dented file cabinet. She was blunt. "So you want me to background check a house full of women you think might be your dead sisters? They're not dead." "You're sure?" "I saw them." "Then you don't need me to prove they exist. You need to know who told the world they didn't." He hesitated, then nodded. "Can you find out who's behind the property trust?" "White Grove Holdings." "Maybe. Depends on how it was built. Most of these shell core are layered 5 deep. I also want to know who the guy is. Drives a dark Ford. Visits once a week. He brought files. Where was this? He gave her the address. Her expression didn't change. Give me 2 days. While he waited, Nolan drove to the edge of the county and stopped outside a building that used to be a middle school. Now it was a charter center for behavioral youth therapy. There were laminated posters on the door about new starts and trauma-informed routines. It had nothing to do with the house, not yet. But he needed to see how people rebuilt identities, how someone could grow up not knowing who they really were. Inside, he asked if they had public literature. One of the receptionists handed him a thin booklet on family separation cases. The language was soft, neutral. A lot of it focused on safe reintegration, but what stood out was a single sentence on page 4. Repeated narratives can overwrite memory in children under the age of 7. His sisters had been 6 when they disappeared. 2 days later, Margo called. You were right about the house. What did you find? The trust that owns it was established in 2011, the year after the funeral. It was set up by a woman named Arlene Taggart. She runs a nonprofit called Red Willow Home Schooling Foundation. But the IRS filings are weird. Almost no reported students. No curriculum logs. Just receipts for housing, food, medical visits. So, a shell. Not quite. I looked deeper. She has a long record. Used to work in child services in Minnesota in the 90s. Quietly let go after an audit. Why? Misplaced records. Missing files. At least 2 reports of children moved across county lines without proper notification. Nolan sat down. There's more, she said. He waited. The car you followed registered to a doctor named Leonie Grammer. Psychiatrist. License expired. But guess what else he used to be? What? A trauma consultant for the National Center for Displaced Youth. He worked with kids pulled from cult homes. Specialized in narrative reassignment. What the hell is that? It's what it sounds like, Margo said. They teach you who you are, even if it's not true. Nolan didn't speak. Do you want me to keep going? She asked. He looked out the window. I think I already know what's next. The next morning, Nolan didn't go to the house. He drove instead to a quiet overlook outside town, one he remembered from years ago. The same bench still stood facing the hills, though the plaque on it was new. He sat there for almost an hour before realizing he wasn't thinking about what to do next. He was thinking about the time Maris fell off the swing set. She'd hit the ground wrong and cried so hard she forgot to breathe. And it was Nolan who carried her inside, knees scraped, hair full of leaves, whispering that she was okay, that no one would let anything happen to her. But something had, and someone had. Back at the motel, he laid everything out on the bed. The Red Willow Foundation. Dr. Leon Grammer. Arlene Taggart. The house with no name on the mailbox. The trust formed just months after the family had stood in front of 3 closed caskets. What connected all of it wasn't proof. It was pattern. Each piece was like a thread, and someone had pulled all those threads just tight enough to keep the story from unraveling. Until now. He went to the county records office again that afternoon. This time, he asked about something else. Was there ever a protective custody filing for 3 minors around June 2010? The clerk blinked at him. You mean like foster intake? Or witness protection? Anything that would have sealed juvenile identities. She looked skeptical, but typed anyway. After a pause, she frowned. There's one case sealed by court order, but no names, no docket notes, just a case ID. Date? Filed June 23, 2010. Closed within 72 hours. That was exactly 10 days after the storm, and 6 days before the funeral. That evening, Nolan parked 2 blocks away from the pale blue house. He didn't bring his phone. Didn't bring the photo either. Just stood behind a tree on the edge of the municipal greenbelt, waiting for the porch light to flicker on. At 7:13, it did. At 7:15, the screen door creaked open. The same girl from before stepped outside. Older now, yes, 19, maybe even 20, but still visibly one of the three. This time, she wasn't alone. The second girl followed, hair tied up, holding a plastic watering can. They spoke to each other for a minute, voices too low to hear. Then one pointed to the edge of the garden bed. Nolan barely breathed. He waited for them to go inside. Then, with a glance over his shoulder, he stepped through the tree line and approached the house. He didn't go to the door. Instead, he walked around the side of the property where a cracked gate led to a side yard, mostly overgrown. An old trash bin. A hose wrapped tight and hung on a rusted hook. From here, he could see a corner of the basement window, painted shut. But the outer wall looked newer, like it had been rebuilt recently. The trim didn't match, and the vent beside it was sealed with wire mesh from the inside. He knelt, reached out, and ran his hand along the base. Faint scratch marks. Parallel. Uneven. Not natural wear. Not animals. Small fingers. He didn't sleep that night. The motel buzzed with neon. Every creak of the hallway felt sharper than usual. He kept thinking about the girl who had looked at him from the garden. She hadn't smiled, hadn't waved, just looked, as if waiting for him to do something. As if she recognized him, not his face, maybe, but something deeper, the weight of something old. By morning, he had made a decision. He didn't go to the police. He drove to the only person left in the state who had been part of the original search effort, a retired ranger named Wes Farber. The man still lived near the lake, in a small cabin set back from the road. Nolan remembered him, tall, gray-bearded, with the kind of voice that never lost its authority. Wes opened the door and stared for a long moment. "You're the brother." Nolan nodded. "I need to talk to you." Wes didn't move. "It's been a long time. I think they're alive." A beat of silence. Then, "You'd better come in." The house smelled like old maps and wood polish. Wes motioned toward a chair, but didn't sit. Nolan laid out what he'd seen. The girls. The house. The strange man with the files. The registered trust. The psychiatric past. When he finished, Wes didn't speak for nearly a minute. Then he said, "We were told to stop looking after 12 days. Told the water was too deep, the storm too strong. We'd found a few shoes and some driftwood. That was supposed to be enough." "Who told you?" "Higher up than me. Higher than the station. They said the case was being absorbed into a federal branch." "Why?" "We asked that too." "And?" "They said it was a custody issue." Nolan stared at him. "No one ever filed a custody dispute," he said. "My parents never even got to see the remains. Just a letter from the coroner's office." Then someone lied. Wes opened a drawer and pulled out a narrow envelope. "I kept this," he said. "Figured it didn't sit right at the time. Might not help now, but—" He handed it to Nolan. It was a copy of a lab requisition form, dated June 25, 2010, requesting dental records from a previous family file, but not for identification, for reconstruction. Nolan looked up. "You know what that means, don't you?" "Yeah," Wes said quietly. They built a narrative. Nolan folded the paper. "Then it's time we take it apart." He left the cabin just after dusk. Wes had offered to let him stay the night, but Nolan declined. He needed to think. Not talk. Not listen. Just think. The road back to town wound through long stretches of nothing, pine, pasture, the occasional derelict barn leaning into the wind like it knew it was no longer needed. Nolan rolled the windows down, let the air flood in. By the time he reached the motel, something had changed. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was resolve. He checked his phone. 2 new voicemails. The first was his mother. Soft voice, clipped words. "Your father's worried. You haven't called. Please don't do anything foolish. Just come home, Nolan." The second was from Margo. "I found something strange in the Red Willow filings. One of the girls was issued a new social security number in 2011. The form was backdated, signed by a doctor. Guess who? Leon Grammer. I pulled the signature and ran it through state health archives. It's forged. Want to see the scan? He didn't reply. He just sat with it. Forged identity. A sealed custody case. 3 missing girls who weren't missing anymore, but weren't themselves either. The next morning, he parked 2 blocks from the house again. Waited until after breakfast. At 9:17, the front door opened. It wasn't one of the triplets. It was the woman he'd seen through the kitchen window. The older one, early 60s, short dark hair. She locked the door, walked to the curb, opened the mailbox. Then she turned back toward the porch and paused. For just a moment, she looked into the trees. Not casual, not absent-minded, deliberate. She was checking. Nolan stayed still. She didn't see him. She went back inside, and Nolan moved fast. He circled the block, found the alley behind the property, cut through 2 yards, and stopped at the back fence. It was chain link, rusted in parts. A white plastic chair leaned against it like someone had used it to reach the top. He climbed it carefully, dropped down inside. The backyard was empty. He crossed quickly to the side yard. There, under the eaves, was the same basement window, painted shut, then sealed. This time, he brought a screwdriver. It only took 4 minutes to loosen the vent screws. Inside, he saw nothing but darkness. Then, barely visible, cardboard lining the interior wall, and something scratched into the lower panel. I know I'm not WHO they say I am. He stepped back. That night, he didn't go back to the motel. He slept in his car, parked near an old train depot on the edge of town. Restless sleep. A dream he didn't remember fully, just the impression of someone whispering his name from underwater. When he woke, it was still dark. He checked the time. 4:16 a.m. And there, on the windshield, was a piece of paper under the wiper blade. He got out slowly. No one around. The paper was folded once. Inside, in narrow handwriting. Stop looking. You're not helping them. No signature. No print. Just the message. He went back to Margo the next day. I need to know where the girls were between 2010 and 2012. She looked up from her monitor. I've been trying. Their paper trail doesn't exist before 2011. But I did find a shipping record, bulk food deliveries made to a location in southern Missouri under the Red Willow Foundation name. Location was listed as a retreat center. Still operating? Technically. But the property's been under renovation for 5 years. Address? She handed it to him. He drove there the same day. 4 hours south. Long rural stretch. No signage. Just a gravel road, unmaintained, leading into a grove of dying pines. At the end, a concrete structure half reclaimed by weeds. Windows boarded. Door chained. But something told him this was it. He walked the perimeter. Found a side entrance. Busted open. Frame warped from weather. Inside, darkness, dust, the smell of mildew, and something else. A row of cots, 3 high, military style, each with a nameplate scratched off. Drawings on the walls. Pencil, faded, childlike. One had a girl with 3 braids. Another showed a staircase that led into a square room. No exits. In a metal drawer, he found a ledger. No names, just numbers. Dates. Small notations like early recall, slow reassignment, mirror deflection successful, and then, at the bottom of the last page, refiled under Grove IDs. CAT if questioned. AT. Arlene Taggart. He left before dark. Didn't look back. Because now, he didn't need to. They hadn't just been hidden. They'd been reformatted. Systematically. On his drive back, he stopped by a public library in a neighboring town. Not for records. For footage. He accessed the digital archive for local news clips from 2010. Searched for terms like lake search, missing triplets, storm disappearance. At first, nothing. Then, a clip from a regional segment. Blurry footage of volunteers. Search dogs. Interview with a sheriff. And a background figure that made Nolan stop breathing. A woman with short, dark hair, holding a clipboard. Not in uniform, not introduced, but visible, clear. It was her. The woman from the house, from the kitchen window, from the mailbox. She had been there. From the beginning. Nolan didn't speak for the rest of the night. He sat in the car behind the gas station near Route 81, headlights off, engine quiet. The printout of the news footage lay across his lap. He'd watched the clip 5 times already. Slower each time. It wasn't just that she had been there in 2010. It was her posture, her focus. She wasn't helping. She wasn't grieving. She was overseeing. And she didn't want to be seen. But someone had caught her on tape anyway. By morning, Nolan had a plan. He stopped by a coffee shop outside of town, used the Wi-Fi, and sent Margo a compressed folder of everything: photos, documents, the scratched message from the vent, the clip from 2010. The subject line was simple: "If I go quiet, release all of this." Then he made one more stop. A hardware store. He bought 2 things: a crowbar and a small pen flashlight. He wasn't going to knock again. At dusk, Nolan returned to the pale blue house. The neighborhood was mostly quiet, families finishing dinner, sprinklers clicking over yellow lawns. He parked down the street, cut through the alley, and crouched behind the chain-link fence again. This time, he waited longer. He saw lights turn off, heard the screen door open and close. 9:42 p.m. Someone stepped outside onto the porch. A girl's voice murmured something. Another responded. They went back inside. At 9:51, the porch light went out. He waited another 10 minutes, then moved. He scaled the fence silently, crossed the backyard, reached the basement wall. The vent cover had been replaced, but not repainted. He pried it off gently with the crowbar, then shined the flashlight inside. The cardboard had been torn down. The wall was bare, but he could see the scratches more clearly now, dozens of them in layers, like someone had written, then erased, then written again. One phrase repeated at least 4 times. "I'm not who I am." Nolan exhaled. Then he heard it. A voice. Behind him. Low. Measured. "You're trespassing." He turned slowly. The woman from the house stood at the edge of the porch. Not startled. Not angry. Just watching. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," Nolan said quietly. She didn't move. "You've been following them," she said. "Photographing. Waiting. They're my sisters." "No," she said. "They're not." A beat of silence. Then Nolan stepped back from the window. "You were there," he said. "In 2010. You were part of the search team. I was part of their placement." "What does that mean?" "It means they're safer now than they've ever been." She took a step forward. "They were not removed out of cruelty. They were removed because the environment was unsafe." "You mean our family?" "I mean their future." He stared at her. "I saw what they lived in. I saw what they wrote on the walls. Someone built a room with no exits." She didn't flinch. "You don't understand the damage that was done before they ever arrived at that house." "And who decides that?" Nolan asked. "Who decides they should vanish?" "No one vanished," she said. "They were given new lives. Clean slates. You weren't meant to find them, but I did." She sighed. A long, tired breath. "They don't remember you. That's not their fault. They don't want to." He took a step toward her. "They don't know they have a brother." Her silence confirmed it. "You erased us. We gave them continuity. You gave them control." She finally stepped down from the porch. Her voice softened, but her eyes stayed cold. "You're asking the wrong questions," she said. "You think you're uncovering something terrible. But the real story is this." She paused. "They've never come looking for you." Nolan froze. It was like a pin dropping in a quiet church. She walked past him, toward the side gate. "I'm not stopping you," she said. "Do what you came to do. But ask yourself why none of them ever knocked on your door." The gate closed behind her, and she was gone. He stood there for a long time. Then he turned back to the window, slid the flashlight deeper, And that's when he saw it, tucked into the far corner of the basement. A shoe. Small. Faded red canvas. The same kind they used to wear at recess. The same kind Maris had cried about losing the week before the disappearance. It was too small for her now. But someone had kept it anyway. He sat on the ground, back to the wall. And for the first time, he let himself feel it. Not just the anger or the suspicion or the rage, but the question underneath it all. What if they really were better off? What if the people who raised them, whatever else they'd done, had given the girls something Nolan never could? Distance from a past that hurt too much to name. His phone buzzed. One new message from Margo. Got a hit on Arlene Tagger. She was never certified by any state agency, but she ran 4 youth relocation programs between 2002 to 2015. All dissolved. One under investigation for coercion. I'll keep digging. He stared at the screen. The final puzzle piece was coming, but it would cost something, and Nolan wasn't sure anymore if he wanted the answer. Because some truths don't set you free. They replace you. The shoe stayed with him. He wrapped it in an old t-shirt, placed it carefully in the passenger seat, and drove in silence. Not back to the motel. Not to the library. He didn't even really know where he was going until he pulled into a rest stop outside of Carlinville, parked beside a row of empty semis, and killed the engine. For a long time, he just sat there, hand resting on the wrapped fabric. He didn't want to tell his parents yet. He didn't want to tell Margo. He didn't even want to tell himself. There was something about the woman's last words that stuck in his chest like a splinter. They've never come looking for you. What if she was right? What if it wasn't just reprogramming or trauma or forced forgetting? What if they'd grown up and chosen not to return? What if remembering him meant remembering everything? The next day, Margo sent a file. A list of names. 10 girls, all from southern or central Illinois. All transferred between 2004 and 2011 under the Red Willow Foundation's Transitional Care Program. All placed with families in secluded counties. All around the same age. All labeled as relocation for trauma stabilization. But there was no trauma record. No school incidents. No foster removals. Just quiet removals from hospital backrooms, rural shelters, and in one case, a police cruiser during a storm. Their old names disappeared. Their birth certificates were altered or sealed. They'd been removed from the world cleanly. Systematically. Like data purged from a drive. Only 3 had matches that resurfaced later under new names. All 3 were in the same district. Same middle school. Same volleyball team. And all 3 had received federal tuition waivers under Section 8B, a clause normally reserved for at-risk wards of the state. But these girls hadn't been wards. They'd been erased. Nolan found their names. He found their school photos. And even though their features had changed, even though time had done its quiet work, he knew it was them. Maris, Ella, Lena. He closed the laptop. His stomach turned. It was like looking at a photograph that had been slightly misprinted, all the same lines, but shifted half an inch off their axis. They were smiling, happy, even. But it wasn't the smiles he remembered. It was the absence behind them. Not blankness, not pain, just distance. He printed the photos, folded them, put them in his wallet behind an old license and a torn receipt. And for the first time in years, Nolan did not feel triumphant. He felt displaced, like he'd been watching someone else's story unfold, only to realize too late that he was the forgotten footnote. 3 days passed before he built up the nerve to drive past the house again. He didn't stop. He didn't park. He just slowed down as he passed the block. The front porch light was on. 2 of the girls were sitting on the steps, talking, laughing. One had earbuds in. The other tossed a tennis ball against the siding. Nolan kept driving. He didn't take a picture. He didn't wave. He didn't stop to remind them who he was. Because something in him already knew. They wouldn't remember. That night, he called his mother. She picked up on the second ring. Nolan? Yeah, I've been waiting. I know. A pause. Then, did you find anything? He swallowed. I found them. Silence. Then a sound. Not a gasp. Not a cry. Just a sharp breath pulled through the nose. Are they okay? She asked. They're safe, he said. That was the word he chose. Not happy. Not whole. Just safe. And for his mother, that was enough. He didn't tell her where. He didn't tell her how. He just let her believe, for the first time in 13 years, that the worst part might be over, even if the truth sat between them like a closed door. But later that week, something changed. A package arrived at his motel. No return address. Inside, a burned CD, unlabeled, and a note handwritten in neat block letters. Ask about the night before the storm. No explanation. No signature. Just that. He found an old portable drive in the motel's front desk drawer. Hooked it up to his laptop. The disk spun. Then a hiss of audio. At first, just ambient noise, creaking wood, distant wind. Then a child's voice. I don't want to go. I don't like the van. Another voice, older. Don't say that. We're going to play the game. Then a man's voice. You're not going back. You hear me? It's too late now. More rustling. Then silence. Then crying. Not loud. Just one of them. Maybe Maris. Nolan hit pause. He couldn't listen anymore. The girls hadn't wandered off. They hadn't been taken in the panic. They'd been removed the night before the evacuation by someone they knew. Someone who'd made it look like a tragedy during the chaos. Someone who had been waiting for the right moment. And if the tape existed, there was more. There always was. The woman who watched from windows. The rooms built with no exits. The false names. The forgotten brother. The system had worked so well for so long. Until someone looked too closely. Until someone saw the truth walking past a backyard birthday party. Nolan couldn't sleep after hearing the tape. He lay on the motel bed, arms crossed behind his head, the faint hum of the mini fridge the only sound in the room. The CD sat in its case on the nightstand like a relic, something unearthed too late and too carefully preserved. He played it again, not to hear the voices this time, but to hear what was around them. The wind, the shifting wood, the silence between cries. He was looking for something else, some ambient detail that didn't belong. And at the 2-minute mark, he found it. Metal groan. Then soft bang. Then footsteps. Faint. Measured. It didn't come from the kids. Or the man. It sounded farther away, like someone was walking along a suspended walkway. Not gravel. Not wood. Steel. Nolan sat up. He knew that sound. It was a service tunnel, a ventilation shaft, something narrow and artificial, something not meant to be walked on. It wasn't just that the girls had been taken. They had been moved into a system designed to make people forget. The next day, he called Margo. I need every document you can find on the Red Willow Foundation's transportation network. Transportation? They didn't just place kids. They moved them. In stages. You're talking about a trafficking operation. I'm talking about a relocation pipeline disguised as a welfare initiative. Margo didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then, okay, I'll dig. While she searched, Nolan returned to the cave. Not the house, not the porch, but the old limestone quarry where the cave system had collapsed years ago. The same place the girls had visited once on a school trip. The same place search crews combed after the 2010 storm in case they'd been swept underground. The cave system had since been sealed, fenced off, and monitored. Too unstable, too dangerous. But Nolan parked at the bottom edge of the hiking trail and waited until dusk, then climbed. The entrance was still chained, but a padlock had been cut recently, left hanging. Someone had been here, and not long ago. He followed the tunnel inside, flashlight beam bouncing off limestone walls. The air smelled like cold dirt and rust. At the second bend, he found the marks, shoe scuffs, drag lines, A cigarette butt, recent. Then something else, etched into the wall with a coin or a nail. Time's almost gone. And below it, 3 stick figures, holding hands, labeled M, L, E. He didn't cry. He just stood there, flashlight trembling slightly, until the beam flickered out. Then he turned back and made a plan. That night, Margo called. "I found the delivery manifests," she said. "They moved kids across state lines using agricultural transport, unmarked trucks." You were right. They built an entire route. Where did it end? Usually in Montana. Sometimes Idaho. One in Colorado. But here's the thing. There's no return documentation. Once a child was placed, they disappeared from the system. They didn't want them found. "No," she said. "But they made a mistake." She sent him a file. Inside, a redacted field report dated March 2012. It listed 3 girls, ages 11 to 12, as having completed stabilization in a location referred to as Site 4C, under aliases. One of them, Lily Taggart, but the original name had been scratched out, sloppily, and beneath the scratch marks, faint but readable, was the name, Maris Hale. He had them. For the first time in 13 years, he had proof. And still, the question gnawed at him. Why him? Why now? Why did he see them when no one else did? He pulled out the CD again, listened to the tape once more, and then, as the final sob faded, he heard something he hadn't before. A whisper, right at the end. A child's voice. Maris's voice. Not afraid. Not crying. Just whispering. "We didn't forget." Nolan stood still. The motel buzzed around him. Distant traffic, a flickering porch bulb, someone coughing in the next room. But all he could hear was that voice. We didn't forget. That night, he returned to the backyard party house. Not to confront anyone. Not to demand answers. Just to watch. From across the street, at 9:03 p.m., the kitchen light flicked on. 3 girls moved through the frame, silhouettes behind gauze curtains. One turned, paused, looked out the window, straight toward him. She didn't wave. She didn't call out. She just stood there, staring. And in that moment, Nolan didn't feel like a brother. He felt like a memory, something half-remembered and out of place. He turned and walked away. The next morning, Nolan didn't check out of the motel. He just left the key on the desk and drove. For hours. Past farmhouses and silos, past railroad crossings, and forgotten bridges. He wasn't going anywhere specific, just farther from the light in that window. From the shape of her face. From the way she had looked at him. Not with fear. Not even with recognition. But with containment. As if she'd been trained not to react. As if that reaction had been rehearsed. Midway through the afternoon, Margo called again. "I found Site 4C, she said. "Where is it?" "Outside Ketchum, Idaho. But it's gone now. Bulldozed. Built over with a retirement condo project. But I got access to aerials from 2011. She emailed the images. Nolan pulled over to a gas station, opened the file on his phone. Rows of prefab trailers. The central barn structure. A ring of fencing. And one detail caught his breath. In the aerial photo, behind one of the trailers, was a familiar shape. A tire swing. Slightly off-center. He'd seen it before. In a drawing Maris had made in 2008, one of the last taped to the fridge. It was their swing. Later that night, Margo sent another photo. Blurry. Black and white. Clearly scanned from microfilm. A photo of a man, hand on a girl's shoulder. The caption read, "Red Willow Orientation Director, Samuel K. Ford with new resident, 2011. Nolan stared. He didn't know the man. But the girl, face turned partially toward the camera, had a freckle above her eyebrow. Just like Ella. Same crooked smile. Same unsure hands. She was wearing a red cord bracelet. The kind their mother used to make. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "Departmental Archives." filed under religious housing compliance. They listed Red Willow as a spiritual retreat network. Even though it was moving kids, they rebranded. Nonprofit under a private trust. No tax filings after 2013. What happened in 2013? The founder died, Margo said. A boating accident. No heir. Everything dissolved into the trust and scattered. So there's no one left to confront? Not unless you count a ghost. Nolan didn't sleep. He drove to the lake. The same one from the day the girls vanished. It had changed. New dock, new signs, a metal fence along the south edge. But the water still carried the same quiet, the same emptiness. He walked along the perimeter, found the old boathouse, weathered, partially collapsed. Inside, a forgotten bin of life vests, most moldy and torn. And at the bottom, an oar, initials carved into the handle. M+J+E. They'd made the mark the summer before the storm. The girls had begged him to take them out in the boat one last time before school started. He'd refused. He had a headache. They'd gone anyway, with someone else. Back at his car, a message waited, from an unlisted number. One sentence. You have to let them go. No name, no context. Just that. He stared at it for a long time, then deleted it. He checked into a motel in Missoula. Smaller this time. Older. The kind with cigarette burns on the blankets and too many channels that didn't work. He opened his laptop, clicked through every file, every school photo, every background check, every transcript Margo had pulled. And there, in the file for Lily Taggart, he found something strange. A field trip permission form, dated 2 years earlier than the other files, 2009. And in a corner, in faded pen, medical concerns, identical sibling allergies. Refer to sister record. Nolan's chest tightened. It meant they hadn't been separated until after 2009. It meant they'd been together somewhere. And then someone had divided them. 3 placements, 3 new names, 3 narratives crafted like stage plays. That night, he returned to the neighborhood. Not the house, the wooded edge behind it. He parked beneath a burnt-out streetlight and waited until the last porch light flicked off. Then walked the perimeter. No camera, no flashlight, just instinct. Behind the backyard, he found a gate. Rusty, unlocked. Beyond it, a shed, padlocked. But the hinges were weak. He didn't break in. He didn't even touch the door. He just stood there, staring at it, breathing in the faint scent of mildew and garden soil. Then he stepped back and saw it, faintly scratched into the shed's side panel. 3 initials, E.L. Not in that order, but there. Still visible, still waiting. He drove all night, didn't stop until sunrise, didn't call his parents, didn't tell Margo. He just kept moving, somewhere west, somewhere silent, somewhere where no one knew what had been taken or what had survived. Because now he knew. They had lived. They had been changed. But they had lived. And he had not. Not in the same way. In the weeks that followed, Nolan didn't file any reports. He didn't contact local authorities. He didn't try to reclaim what had been lost. There was no reclaiming it. Instead, he returned to the places that still felt like memory. The creek where Ellie used to collect smooth stones. The community center where Maris once danced barefoot across the linoleum floor. The broken corner of the dock where June had split her lip and never told anyone. He went back not for closure, but to remember as it really was before it was rewritten. The 3 girls had been reshaped, given new names, new birthdays, new lives. But pieces of the original story had survived in slips of language, old drawings, a scar beneath an eyebrow. They hadn't forgotten. They had just been taught not to remember aloud. That was what made it all harder. Not that they were lost, but that they had been taught to stay gone. One morning, a package arrived. No return address. Just a small, padded envelope taped at the edges. Inside, folded note and a photo. The note was one sentence, written in careful, looped handwriting. "We're okay now. Please don't come back." The photo was older, taken maybe 2 years ago. The three of them, standing side by side. A birthday cake between them. Only 6 candles on it. They looked calm, not smiling, but not afraid. And behind them, in soft focus, a mural on the wall of 3 birds in flight, uncaged. Nolan didn't show it to anyone. He didn't scan it, didn't post it. He just placed it inside a wooden box in his closet, beside the sandal they'd found at the lake and the CD from Margo. And then he closed the lid. A few months later, he returned to the old house, the one where it had all started. The cabin had been sold years ago, but the trees still looked the same. So did the clearing. At the edge of the property, someone had hung a new wind chime from a nail, made of mismatched silverware, the kind their mother used to collect at flea markets. It moved slightly in the wind. Soft, hollow music. He stood there a long time, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the one item he'd kept for himself. A drawing. Old, crinkled, faded from years of tape and sun. 3 stick figures, labeled in faint pencil. Me, my sisters, our dock. He slipped it beneath the wind chime, pressed it into the wood with a small rock. Didn't say anything, didn't cry, just listened. And as he walked away, the sound of metal chimes followed him down the hill. Soft, steady, and somewhere behind it, like a breath against trees, the sound of laughter. 3 voices, small, familiar, just for a moment, and then gone.